Picture this. You're trapped in a medieval dungeon, chains around your ankles, staring at a bowl of what might generously be called gruel. The year is 1347, and you've been sentenced to life imprisonment for the heinous crime of being too talkative at the market. Your daily rations consist of moldy bread crusts, mystery meat floating in greasy water, and ale so watered down it's practically soup. But what if I told you that with these exact same ingredients, medieval prisoners actually created feasts that would make kings jealous? Today, we're diving into the surprisingly ingenious world of medieval prison cooking, where necessity truly was the mother of culinary invention. Medieval prison food was designed to keep you barely alive, not satisfied. Guards would dump your daily rations like they were feeding livestock. Stale bread that had been sitting for days, sometimes weeks. Meat so questionable that even the rats looked skeptical. Water thick with sediment and God knows what else floating around in it. The portions were calculated to provide just enough calories to prevent death, but not enough to give you energy for escape attempts. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval prisoners weren't just passive victims of this culinary torture. They developed an entire underground food culture that would put modern cooking shows to shame. These weren't professional chefs we're talking about. These were desperate people who transformed garbage into gourmet meals using nothing but creativity and sheer determination. The foundation of any prison feast started with bread rehabilitation. Those rock-hard crusts that could probably be used as building materials. Prisoners discovered that soaking them in whatever liquid they could find created a surprisingly versatile base. They'd save drops of ale from their meager rations, mix it with water, and create a bread soup that actually had flavor. The key was patience. Let those crusts soak for hours until they broke down into something resembling porridge. But the real magic happened when prisoners started collaborating. Medieval dungeons were crowded places, and necessity forced inmates to pool their resources. One prisoner might save their meat scraps, while another hoarded vegetable peelings that guards had carelessly tossed into cells. A third might have figured out how to catch rainwater that leaked through the stone walls, providing cleaner liquid for cooking. The cooking methods were primitive but effective. Prisoners would create makeshift fires using straw from their bedding and whatever combustible materials they could find. Obviously, this had to be done secretly, as guards weren't exactly encouraging culinary experimentation. The smoke was managed by timing these cooking sessions during shift changes or when guards were distracted. Now, about that mystery meat floating in your daily prisoners quickly learned that what looked like random chunks of gristle could be transformed into something approaching edible with the right techniques. They'd carefully separate any actual meat from the fat and cartilage. The meat would be dried using body heat and air circulation, creating a primitive form of jerky that could last for weeks. The fat wasn't wasted either. Medieval prisoners discovered that rendered fat could be used for multiple purposes. It served as cooking oil for their secret food preparation. But, more importantly, it could be mixed with herbs and plant matter to create flavor compounds that made everything else taste better. Speaking of herbs, this is where prison ingenuity really shined. Many medieval prisons were built with small courtyards, or areas where weeds and wild plants grew between stone cracks. Prisoners became expert botanists out of necessity, learning to identify edible plants that guards ignored completely. Dandelions, wild garlic, and various berries became precious commodities in the prison economy. The vegetable situation was more complex. Prison rations rarely included fresh vegetables, but prisoners found ways around this limitation. Kitchen scraps that were meant for pigs sometimes contained potato peelings, onion ends, or other vegetable remnants. These would be carefully collected, cleaned, and incorporated into communal meals. Fermentation became a crucial technique in medieval prison cooking. Prisoners learned that leaving certain food combinations in hidden corners for specific periods could create alcoholic beverages that not only provided calories, but also served as antiseptics for wound cleaning. They'd mix bread scraps with fruit remnants and whatever sugar sources they could find, creating a primitive prison wine that was surprisingly potent. The social aspect of these feasts was just as important as the food itself. Medieval prisoners developed elaborate systems for fair distribution of ingredients and cooking duties. Senior inmates would pass down cooking knowledge to newcomers, creating a culinary tradition that spanned generations of imprisonment. Seasoning was achieved through creative use of available materials. Salt was occasionally available when prisoners could scrape it from stone walls where moisture had evaporated. Pepper and other spices were incredibly rare, but prisoners learned to create flavor enhancers using charcoal, certain types of ash, and fermented plant materials. The timing of these feasts was carefully planned around prison routines. Guards had predictable schedules, and prisoners would coordinate their cooking during times when supervision was minimal. These meals became the highlight of prison life, providing not just nutrition, but also hope and community bonding. Preservation techniques were essential for making ingredients last. Prisoners would smoke meat using controlled fires and specific types of wood when available. They'd create salt cures using whatever sodium sources they could find. Drying was accomplished using air circulation and body heat, with prisoners taking turns warming food items against their skin. Water purification was a constant challenge, but prisoners developed methods for making their drinking water safer and more palatable. They'd create primitive filters using cloths and sand, and learn that boiling water over their secret fires could eliminate some contaminants. Adding certain herbs not only improved flavor, but also provided antimicrobial properties. The bread-making process was perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of prison cooking. Prisoners would save tiny amounts of yeast-containing materials from their regular rations, nurturing these starter cultures like precious pets. With careful temperature control and timing, they could actually produce fresh bread using hoarded flour or grain particles. Meat preparation went far beyond just cooking. Prisoners learned butchery techniques that maximized the use of every scrap they could obtain. Bones were cracked open for marrow, which provided crucial fats and nutrients. Organ meats, when available, were prepared using techniques passed down through generations of imprisoned cooks. The psychological impact of these feasts cannot be overstated. In an environment designed to dehumanize and break spirit, the act of creating something beautiful and delicious from scraps was profoundly empowering. These meals reminded prisoners of their humanity and provided motivation to survive another day. Cooking tools were improvised from whatever materials prisoners could find or create. Spoons were carved from wood scraps or bones. Bowls were fashioned from broken pottery or carved stone. Knives were created from metal fragments, though these had to be carefully hidden from guards who considered any sharp object a weapon. The economics of prison cooking created complex bartering systems. Prisoners would trade cooking services for protection, exchange rare ingredients for information, or share meals in return for other necessities. A particularly skilled prison cook could achieve a status that provided significant advantages in the harsh prison hierarchy. Recipe knowledge was jealously guarded and carefully transmitted. Master prison cooks would take apprentices, teaching them not just cooking techniques, but also the crucial skills of ingredient procurement, tool creation, and guard avoidance. This knowledge represented survival skills that could mean the difference between life and death. Seasonal variations affected prison cooking significantly. Spring brought new plant growth that could be foraged from prison yards. Summer provided opportunities for drying and preserving foods. Fall meant potential access to fruits and nuts that might fall into prison courtyards. Winter required careful management of preserved foods and creative use of limited resources. The medical aspects of prison cooking were surprisingly sophisticated. Certain food combinations were known to prevent scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies common in prison populations. Herbal remedies were incorporated into meals, providing both flavor and medicinal benefits. Prisoners learned which foods could help with digestive issues caused by their normally terrible diet. Storage was a constant challenge in medieval prisons. Prisoners had to hide their accumulated ingredients and prepared foods from both guards and potentially thieving fellow inmates. They developed ingenious hiding places within cell walls, under loose floorboards, and in other concealed locations that required both creativity and risk. Temperature control for cooking and storage required understanding air circulation patterns within prison structures. Prisoners learned to use body heat, trapped air spaces, and even the warmth from other prisoners to maintain optimal conditions for food preparation and preservation. The communal aspect of prison feasts served multiple functions beyond just sharing food. These gatherings provided opportunities to share information, plan group activities, and maintain morale during the darkest periods of imprisonment. The person who could organize and execute a successful prison feast often became a natural leader within the inmate community. Quality control in prison cooking meant developing the ability to distinguish between ingredients that were merely unappetizing and those that were actually dangerous. Prisoners became expert at identifying spoiled food, contaminated water, and toxic plants, skills that were essential for survival in an environment where food poisoning could be fatal. Innovation in prison cooking was driven by constantly changing conditions. New inmates brought different knowledge and techniques. Changes in guard routines required adaptation of cooking schedules. Seasonal variations in available ingredients demanded flexibility and creativity in recipe development. The legacy of medieval prison cooking techniques influenced broader culinary traditions in ways that food historians are still discovering. Many preservation methods, fermentation techniques, and creative uses of limited ingredients that developed in medieval prisons eventually found their way into mainstream cooking practices. These prison feasts represented more than just survival techniques. They were acts of rebellion against a system designed to strip away dignity and humanity. By creating something beautiful and nourishing from the scraps they were given, medieval prisoners demonstrated that the human spirit could not be completely broken, no matter how harsh the conditions. The transformation of medieval prison rations into feast-worthy meals required not just cooking skills, but also expertise in procurement, preservation, tool-making, social organization, and risk management. These were complete culinary ecosystems that operated in secret within the harsh confines of medieval justice systems. Today, we can look back at these ingenious medieval prisoners as pioneering chefs who proved that great cooking isn't about having access to the finest ingredients. It's about understanding how to transform whatever you have into something that nourishes both body and soul. Their legacy reminds us that, even in the darkest circumstances, human creativity and determination can create moments of joy and community that sustain hope for better days ahead.